Back from lunch. Please go ahead and take your seats so that we can get started. While we're waiting for everybody to take their seats, I just wanted to call attention to some things that were in your bag that hopefully by now you haven't thrown away, your conference bag. So in your bag was a purple form that looked like this, and it was to tell you a little bit about the Clarence Morrison Journal Internship that we have. It was established to honor a former IAES president, and he was a longtime member of the AEJ Board of Editors as well, and in his memory we have this internship for students to come and work at the society and learn what it is to work in an editorial office. And so it's a very nice thing, so we welcome your contributions to support that effort. There's also in your bag a form that's white with globes all around the edges, and this is a form requesting your support for our grant program. So this is to encourage people from Eastern Europe and Turkey and Africa to be able to come to our meeting as we use these funds to help support their ability to attend. We ask you to give generously. Also in here is some advertisements about the Best Undergraduate Paper Award. This is a gray form, and it has a nice graph on the back. Grace is responsible for this. She worked very hard on that. At any rate, if you have very good undergraduate students that would like to enter the competition, all we request is that they submit their paper written while they were in undergrad, and it does need to be their work. Submit their paper by June the 15th, and then they submit also a letter from their mentor attesting that this is work done while they were in undergrad, and that if they're chosen as one of the final four, that the school will cover their travel costs. And then if they win the award after making their presentation at the conference, then the winner gets $500. Each of the three runners-up gets $100. The winner gets to publish their article in the Atlantic Economic Journal, and the runners-up each get to publish an anthology. So it's a very nice thing for the undergrads. It looks very good on their CV, so please consider supporting that. And finally, there's a membership form in there, a blue membership form. So if you didn't renew your membership yet for 2015, I would encourage you to do so. What's really a good deal is the 3-year membership, because you do save money. And even better is the lifetime membership, because it's a hedge against inflation. It's a really good deal. So anyway, if you have questions and are interested, let me know. So at any rate, it looks like most people are in their seats now, so I'll cease with the advertisements and move on with the main focus of today's events. So let me get some of these things out of the way. All right, so I will begin by introducing our head table. If I get everybody to quiet down just a little bit now. Thank you. Okay, so at our head table, to my far left, your far right, is Ludwig Dietrich. He's a professor at the University of Life Sciences in Prague in the Czech Republic. He's a former member of the executive committee, and he was the local program chair when our conference was held in Prague. He's a longtime member of the IAER Board of Editors. Seated next to Ludwig is Gordon Brady, who I've already introduced many times, but he's the former senior economist to the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Senate. He's currently a member of the executive committee, and he's also a longtime member of the AEJ Board of Editors. Next is our current president, Charles Calamiris, the Henry Kaufman Professor of Financial Institutions at Columbia Business School. So at this point, I'll turn the podium over to Gordon Brady to introduce our speaker.
It is a pleasure to introduce you, sir. You may not enjoy it as much as I do, but no, I made some photographs over the years of President Klaus, and we all know he's a great economist, a professor, and a politician. He was president of the Czech Republic from 2003 through 2013. Now he's the president of Institute to Vaclav Klaus. He is obviously ageless, as shown in the next photo. There he is in 2001, and here he is again in 2001. Now, last night I made this photograph of him, replicating the exact same pose and the exact same look on his face. Truly ageless. I don't know how you do it, Mr. President. This shows the Institute of Václav Klaus, And there he is. That is a little exaggerated. He looks, he's still a rock star, but that's not quite as good as some of the other photographs. I got that one off the internet. He's received over 50 honorary degrees, and he was telling me yesterday that he had gotten one in Tucson some years ago, one of the most coveted, because Gordon Tullock, who was also president of the Atlantic, was the one who made the arrangements for it. He's written a tremendous amount of publications in major economic journals, and he's done books. In fact, at the 2008 Mont Pelerin Society, I was able to get him to autograph his climate book, which has had an impact on climate politics. It hasn't reversed everything, but it's still out there making changes. His recent work includes Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic, the spirit and the main contours of post-communist transformation. It's going to build, his presentation today will build upon that, and it's entitled Looking at Europe and its Stagnating Economy from Prague. So, without further ado, I want you to welcome President Klaus. I don't know quite how to do this, but we got to get rid of it. Oops. Thank you, sir.
Gordon, thank you very much for such an introduction. I don't remember to be introduced by means of old photos. This is a totally new experience, and I don't know whether I am still alive. It's surprising, but speaking about my past, so I don't need it. This is for the younger generation. For the older generation, it's. By the way, speaking about, I was here for Gordon. I was for the first time here in this city, in my previous life, when I still was internationally playing basketball, and I played basketball here in Milan in 1965, which is really something. So thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and for giving me an opportunity to address this distinguished audience. I looked when I was here last time in Milano, and my last speech in this historic city was 6 years ago, when I was presenting here the Italian version of my book devoted to the economic critique of the global warming doctrine. This is what Gordon mentioned. The book was called Pianeta Blu, non verde, blue planet, not green planet, and I must say, I'm not sure whether it has any influence, but nevertheless, the book was translated into 20 languages, which is already something, I challenged in it the very shaky economic foundations of this mistakenly considered non-economic, non-social science doctrine. The environmentalists and their politicians do not try to understand the meaning of discounting, the subtleties of intertemporal decision-making, the relationship between the stock of natural resources and technical progress, the irreplaceable role of prices in any meaningful decision-making, the connection between the level of economic development and of income and the demand for environment protection, etc., etc. I must say that I am frustrated that the economic profession does not pay sufficient attention to this important, if not crucial, issue of our time. In the subtitle of my book, I ask, what is endangered, climate or freedom? And of course, my answer was that climate is okay, but freedom is endangered in our world. So even though the economic science has enough arguments to answer these questions correctly, it doesn't use them sufficiently. So I am very sorry about that. I am glad to be among economists because in the last 25 years, after entering politics in the moment of the fall of communism, I was more often among politicians or at conferences where economists try to give advice and to sell their ideas to politicians. So it's much more productive to be here. As a true believer in economic science, I know that to come here with anything meaningful asks for making use of one's comparative advantages. They are, in my case, hopefully, in the rather tricky field between economics and politics. They are about Europe and its economy. They are connected with my experience of living in a country which has been already now more than 10 years in the European Union, member of the European Union, and last but not least, with my personal experience based on my life spent in communism, in an irrational system of central planning, of state ownership, of rigid administratively formed prices, of shortage economy, etc. When I got a chance 25 years ago to organize or co-organize the economic transformation of my country, I didn't approach this historically unique task with over-ambitious constructivistic plans. By doing it, I learned even more than I expected that the transformation process was not an exercise in applied economics, that it was not a controlled experiment, that the necessary steps were not taken in a political and social vacuum, and that the decisions were not made at meetings of sophisticated economists. I understood that to make an analogy, it was necessary to be capable of playing chess and to convince the citizens of the country that you are a good chess player. But it was absolutely impossible to organize this complicated, many-dimensional process as a chess game. It was not possible to attempt at implementing all the theories about the optimal sequencing of reform measures, or to know the position on the chessboard after the 25th move of the Black Queen. The transition was done in a real time, with many political, economic, social, and foreign policy constraints. Its substance is still mostly misunderstood or misinterpreted. Foreign investors or business people used to have different interests than to understand the logic of this process. Foreign observers have got only a very limited knowledge of that process, and we, who were there, didn't have time to write books about it. To caricature the substance of that unique historic process, as it is repeatedly done, even now in serious economic journals, as a dispute between the advocacy of shock therapy and gradualism is totally missing the point. I am pleased to discover that there is somewhere the Economic Affairs journal published by the Buckingham's University and Institute of Economic Affairs with my article discussing the difference between shock therapy, the nonsense speaking about shock therapy or gradualism. Only Professor Stiglitz is able to speak about gradualism, and he is missing the point totally. Nevertheless, I, to my great positive surprise, discovered that the journal is there, free to be distributed. Despite all my criticisms of some of its aspects, I dare arguing that the post-communist transition in my country and in some other Central and East European countries as well was a success. What is important, and what is important especially now in connection with today's discussions about how to solve the untenable indebtedness of some EU countries, it is undeniable but not often mentioned fact that the transition was done without any meaningful foreign aid. It's forgotten, not seriously discussed. Without any quantitatively significant financial help from abroad, without fiscal transfers from anywhere. There is only just country which got a lot of money and has been getting a lot of money every year, even now, which is, of course, as I'm sure you know, East Germany. We live in a much better political and economic system now than 25 years ago, but we are in many respects disappointed. The beginning was promising. We very soon succeeded to establish the standard framework of a full-fledged parliamentary democracy, and on the economic side, to organize a rapid and fundamental systemic change towards a market economy. Radically and without unnecessary delays, we liberalized, deregulated, desubsidized, and privatized the economy. It didn't last long enough, however, both for domestic political reasons and because of our EU accession. We started a reverse process. As a consequence of it, we have been moving away from standard politics to post-political, post-democratic arrangements typical for the current European Union. And our economy has become more regulated and subsidized and harmonized and standardized now than it was the case 10, 15 years ago. The increasingly destructive weakening of the nation state by the European Union and its ideology, and by moving towards global governance fundamentally undermined our sovereignty, and with it, our ability to implement coherent and consistent domestic policies. This is not a denial of all among economists well-known and basically undisputed positive arguments in favor of the economic integration, of opening up of countries, of eliminating unnecessary barriers at the borders of individual countries, of liberalizing flows of goods, services, labor, and capital among countries. This is something else. This is a criticism from me. This is a criticism of the way how Europe has been integrated, and what kind of economic and social system has been gradually established there. The original, less ambitious integration project, which originated in the 1950s, has been, in the last 2 decades, transformed into a centralized, bureaucratic, excessively standardized and harmonized project aiming at the unification of the whole continent. I see in it many features resembling the system we abandoned 25 years ago. The difference between terms integration and unification is in this respect absolutely crucial. Many of us are not convinced about the positivity of the role played by the current EU for us as well as for the rest of Europe. I have to admit, but the other side should admit it as well, that due to the absence of hard and convincing data, it is difficult to correctly and convincingly evaluate the overall impact of our EU membership. As I said, we have not lived in a vacuum. All other things have not been kept equal. The ceteris paribus condition was not fulfilled. This makes a serious quantitative analysis almost impossible. It is nevertheless quite evident that we have entered neither a healthy, prosperous, fast-growing economic area, nor a truly democratic entity. To my great regret, the EU membership brings us back from capitalism to a modern form of European socialism, to a new administratively organized society, which is not much different from the old, in our eyes, totally discredited system. Not to be misunderstood, I see the whole system, not only its details, as basically flawed. Europe continues marching in the same blind alley as before, regardless the no change indicating economic data, regardless the waning respect and position of Europe in the rest of the world, regardless the deepening of the democratic deficit we are confronted with, and regardless the undeniable increase of frustration of those who live in Europe and are objects of this constructivist experiment. The economist should tell all those who are ready to listen that the economic stagnation Europe is facing is not a historical inevitability, that it is a man-made problem, that is an outcome of a deliberately chosen and for years and decades gradually developed European economic and social system on the one hand, and of the more and more centralistic and undemocratic European Union institutional arrangements on the other. They both, and especially they together, form an unsurmountable obstacle to any positive development in the future. As I said, what we go through is not an accident or misfortune. It is a self-inflicted problem. It is a self-inflicted injury. Hundreds of small, at first sight, innocent details have metamorphosed into a serious systemic problem. I know that it's relatively easy, almost politically correct, and already not innovative or courageous to criticize the European reality we see around us. It is more difficult to come up with proposals what to do with it. Let me briefly indicate in the second part of my speech now, let me briefly indicate some steps towards a perspective solution. I have 6 points. First, it is more than evident that the European over-regulated economy, additionally constrained by a heavy load of social and environmental requirements, operating in a paternalistic welfare state atmosphere, cannot grow. This burden is too heavy. If Europe wants to start growing again, if Europe wants to solve its many daunting problems, it has to undertake a far-reaching transformation of its economic and social system. This is my proposal number one. When I say transformation, I don't have in mind partial reforms or cosmetic changes. Even the term structural reforms, in its usual IMF meaning, is inadequate. I have in mind a fundamental systemic change. So this is the issue number one. Second, the excessive and unnatural centralization, bureaucratization, harmonization, standardization, and unification of the European continent have a deep democratic defect, have led to a deep democratic defect there. This I consider, in the long run, a much bigger problem than the current economic stagnation. Getting rid of it means changing the whole concept of the European integration, eliminating its post-Maastricht developments, which forms my proposal number two. We have to rehabilitate the concept of the nation-state, which has proved to be an irreplaceable institution for nothing less important than democracy. To continue repeating the erroneous view of many European politicians that nation-state inevitably leads to wars must be forgotten. Third, more than a year ago, the EU architects and exponents planned to celebrate the first 15 years of the European common currency, of the euro, but this anniversary, if you remember, went almost unnoticed. The euro evidently didn't please practically anyone. On the contrary, it brought new problems. It weakened the self-discipline of individual countries. It created a fuzzy state of affairs without clear delimitation of competencies and responsibilities. It produced an exchange rate which is too soft for the countries of the European North and too hard for the European South. It opened the doors to unproductive and involuntary redistribution. What we see is not an authentic personal solidarity in Europe, but government-organized fiscal transfers. This can't be considered a surprise. European monetary union is nothing else than an extreme version of a fixed exchange rate system. It's as simple as that. I'm sure it's unnecessary to repeat to this audience that all historically known fixed exchange rate regimes all needed exchange rate realignments sooner or later, all of them in the history of mankind. Eliminating this powerful and for centuries efficiently functioning adjustment mechanism was a naive attempt to stop history. We should also say very loudly that the belief that the very heterogeneous European economy could be, in a relatively short period of time, made homogeneous by means of monetary unification belongs to the category of wishful thinking. Europe can be made more homogeneous only by evolution, not by revolution, not by means of a political project. I find it also wrong to concentrate on the criticism of undeniable weaknesses of some, mostly southern EU countries. Their weaknesses have been well known for a long time. They constitute their long-term definitional characteristics. These countries entered the Eurozone with these characteristics and were deliberately admitted to it. We shouldn't pretend that these characteristics appeared unexpectedly in the last couple of years. It is evident that countries like Greece didn't bring about current European problems. The system itself is a problem. By entering the Eurozone, these countries became victims of the single currency system. They were forced to operate in a world of, for them, unsuitable and inappropriate economic parameters. It proved to be untenable. So, letting these countries leave the Eurozone in an organized way would be the beginning of their long journey to a healthy economic future. This is my proposal number 3. Now, number 4 is an anti-proposal. Some directly uninvolved observers and critics, mostly from America, keep telling us, as if we didn't know, that it was a mistake to establish a monetary union whose members enjoy fiscal sovereignty. They recommend us to accompany it with a genuine, full-fledged fiscal union and don't want to hear that the people of Europe want to retain fiscal sovereignty of their nations. Establishing a fiscal union in Europe should not be our task. On the contrary, my proposal number 4 is therefore to guarantee in the future fiscal sovereignty of individual European countries. Number 5, the growing undermining of nation states in Europe has several unpleasant consequences which have been weakening Europe. The most visible of them is the more and more daunting immigration problem. It should be made clear that this is not an issue of an appropriate or sufficiently politically correct approach of Europeans to different cultures, religions, races, ethnicities, as some people try to tell us. The acceptance and even promotion of massive immigration is a mistake which threatens not only to undermine the cohesion of countries in Europe and the social peace in them, but the future of freedom and democracy on our continent. The Economist should explain to politicians that the massive immigration is not a necessary precondition for restarting economic growth in Europe. The Economist should tell the politicians that the European economic stagnation has not been caused by a labor shortage. This is as trivial as it is. The unusually high rates of unemployment prove it. So, my proposal number 5, to rehabilitate nation states, to reintroduce some sort of borders, to get rid of over-generous welfare state policies, and especially to forget the destructive ideology of multiculturalism is my proposal number 5. Last but not least, I am often asked what kind of concrete measures to implement in such situation. I consider this question wrong. It implies that such measures do exist, which is not true. The much needed change must start differently. It must start by acknowledging that the whole system has failed and that the system must be changed. Partial measures are not significant because they cannot change its substance. We need, in Europe, we need a fundamental transformation of our thinking and of our behavior. We need, and it's a nice German term, Paradigmawechsel, the change of the paradigm of our thinking and behaving. This is my proposal number 6. I'm convinced that the historical experience tells us that quite convincingly that the European spending and borrowing culture promoted by years of loose monetary and fiscal policies and by the progressively growing welfare state is not tenable. We should accept that we have run out of monetary and fiscal ammunition and that what remains is a return to free market principles, to a fundamental deregulation, liberalization and desubsidization of the European economy. We shouldn't count on more regulation. We have already too much of it. Those of us who experienced communism have to say that we did not expect that such an extent of government interventionism as we see now could emerge again. It seemed to us that the masterminding of the economy from above was so discredited by the communist experience that it could never return. I must admit that we were wrong. We also wrongly assumed that everyone took for granted that government failure is inevitably much bigger than any imaginable market failure, that the visible hand of the government is always much more dangerous than the invisible hand of the market, that vertical relations in society are less productive and less democratic than horizontal relations. We were also proved wrong. As I said, we have to return to the first principles. Economics cannot be ruled, and the economy cannot be ruled by politics. This was one of the crucial characteristics and main defects of communism. I'm afraid we are very close falling into a similar trap again. To change this way of thinking asks not only for better monetary, fiscal or exchange rate policies, for usual modest structural reforms, for better regulation, for smarter ministers of finance or central bank governors. As I said, it requires a fundamental Paradigmawechsel. The people in Europe need a shock therapy, something we didn't have to go through after the fall of communism because people in our countries were fully awake back then. It was not necessary to tell them that the system was basically wrong. They knew it. I am afraid that the people in Europe are not sufficiently aware of it now. How to tell them that would be a topic for another gathering, for another meeting, not just of economists. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mr. President, we have time for some questions, if you'd like. We have microphones, too. Why don't we start with the lady from France?
I'm so sorry, it's the French tanks again. But before I start, and I try to be as short as I can, but I'm so moved by your speech. I really would like to thank you very much. It's a more liberating talk I had for a very long time. I want to thank you on two things before I ask my question. The first thing is your comment on shock therapy and gradualism. For somebody who worked with Jeffrey Sachs in Russia, I thank you very much, especially your comment against Stiglitz. Thank you. On the second point, your 6 parts on the euro and the European Union. Again, thank you. Now, the question, which is the most difficult thing. I would like to know, what do you propose to do? What I mean, again, referring to the French tank. In France, it's a country of bureaucrats, Eurocrats. The euro, it's a religion. I was just there with MPs, anti-euro, discussing the euro. And it's like banging your head on a closed door. So what will be your first step if you really just wanted to convince? Imagine you have a French politician at the front of you, Mr. Hollande, for instance. What will you say?
Well, I am absolutely sure that Mr. Hollande would be very happy to listen to my presentation here. I'm sure, as I know him from some EU meetings and EU summits. No, what to do? I really don't know. As I said at the end. The people in Europe are not awake. They are not aware of all those problems. They don't look with sufficient attention at their real situation. They still have the feeling that they can have holidays in south of France or in Mallorca or I don't know where, and they still think that everything is okay, which is definitely not true. I remember I was critical of the European Union arrangements already in the 1950s, immediately after the fall of communism. Then it was me who signed a letter, application letter, asking as Prime Minister, asking for membership, and then it was me who signed the membership treaty in 2003 or 4. So I am responsible for it. Nevertheless, I remember in the 1990s, when I got the same question, I said that we didn't have the luxury of being Switzerland or Norway or an island close to Europe or I don't know what. So we had no other chance than to enter the European Union. In the moment of the fall of communism, there are some Czechs here. They may remember that the slogans on the streets of Prague in November '89 the slogans were "Back to Europe," which means the people after half a century of communism wanted to become again normal Europeans, whatever the adjective normal in this respect means. So I was the first in the country who tried to raise a point that back to Europe is something else than, we are in Italy, avanti into the European Union. I'm sure you understand the fundamental difference, but as a politician, you don't have a chance to explain that subtle difference in TV shots for 20 seconds in the evening news. Simply, the country, it was impossible to explain this to the people. So I remember 20 years ago, I was joking that we have to enter the European Union, but we have good experience with velvet revolutions. So the next morning we will enter the European Union. We will start to organize a velvet revolution there. You know, I have to say that we failed. we didn't succeed in doing anything like that. I don't know. I know that especially the situation in France is for me very, very complicated. In many other European countries, you have strong voices on both sides of the argument, even in Germany, even in England, let's say, but in some other countries, and France, I don't see the other side, to my great regret. The Montpellier Society members, we know some of them. We met them last year in Hong Kong in September. This is a tiny grouping of people in France. I don't know. So let's start Velvet Revolution in Europe. That's the only chance. But I'm afraid the people don't see it yet, and I don't know how to change it. And I don't, as a former politician, prime minister, president, I don't want to try to say let's go down and down more and more, and then it could make the people aware of that. This is not what I could afford to recommend to anyone. But I don't see a chance to change it without such a feeling.
There's a gentleman in the middle. Oh, do you have? Okay.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Angelo Sant'Agostino. I'm Italian. I'm presently teaching in Turkey, in Ankara. Well, first of all, I'm a German professor, but I am also a member of the Montpellier Society. So I am a Europeanist and a liberal. This means that I appreciated all what you said concerning liberal principles, but unfortunately I cannot share what you said about the European Union. It's not a surprise for me. I heard you several times in so many meetings of the Montpellier Society, so I know perfectly your position. Well, summing up the 6 points that you explained to us, the sum of these points generate the blowing up of the European Union. Here I want to be brief, of course, just focus on the third point, on the euro, and on the specific point of the third point, which is, because here emerges a sort of incompatibility between liberal thought and anti-Europeanism or anti-monetary union. From Hayek to Einaudi, liberals have already challenged the state monopoly of a currency. The euro is the first example and the only one example of a currency which has not a state behind. The euro is not the currency of the state. Or perhaps you might say it's not a monopoly, but is a partial monopoly. In any case, it's an improvement. Or put it another way, is a proxy of a gold standard, which is so important in liberal thought. You mentioned exchange rates, but I could remind you that a prominent liberal like Mises, he was a strong advocate of a fixed exchange rates. Last point. You made a sort of parallel between European Union and Soviet Union. Sorry, it's hard for me to believe that can be any comparison. So in Prague you have seen the tanks of the Soviet Union, not the tanks of Europe. Enlargement is a process which implies the firm willing of a state to be part. The European Union is not annexing. The European Union is just opening its door. Thank you.
Well, I can't disagree more. You know, you started with saying that you are liberal, but I wanted immediately to ask in American or European sense. But after listening to your question, you demonstrated that you are a good friend of Mr. Obama, and you are liberal in the American sense. So, okay, this is just a statement.
No, that's your statement.
I know.
I am a liberal of the rule, a liberal as I now divorce, if you want. But you have not the right to label me as an American liberal. I reject totally this.
Well, for me, what is really surprising not to see European Union, because how can you say that the euro doesn't have a state behind? Euro has a super state called European Union, which is a perfect example of a...
The super state doesn't exist. It's a product of
You
your
are
fantasy.
probably
Sorry.
living on another planet if you don't see the state here in Europe. So there is a state, but I know this stream of thinking in Italy. I remember a piece written by my very good friend Antonio Martino some 10 years ago, saying that finally we have the euro. This is the end. This is the paradise. This is the end of manipulation with the exchange rate, interest rate. How would you call the quantitative easing of Mr. Draghi yesterday? Is it a?
But it's not politically biased. There is no a single president who can call
I don't want to
say what they
exchange
have to do.
arguments with one person. You should have your speech here about it, you know. But do you suppose that Mr. Draghi is a godlike figure sitting somewhere in the skies and then deciding not as a politician? He's a politician par excellence, Mr. Draghi. Par excellence. It is a perfect definition. So I know that this way of Italian thinking, and I was very sorry for my friend Antonio that he was supporting the same idea. This my third point. Well, I have a very good experience with monetary unions, not just a theoretical one. You know, I used to be the last Minister of Finance of a dissolving monetary union called Czechoslovakia. The separation of Czechoslovakia, everyone thinks about it in political terms, but it was a dissolution of a monetary union called Czechoslovakia with Czechoslovak crown. So I know something about the practical. I did it myself. I know something about the difficulties or no difficulties in dividing a currency. So for me, to divide a currency is a relatively easy task. And our experience with dividing the currency in Slovakia was perfectly clear. And now I know the arguments that the economic ties between Greece and the rest of Europe are very big, and so on and so on. Greece is something like 1.5% of the European GDP, if I'm not wrong. Something like 1.5%. I had a speech last week in Prague, and I got the same question, and I said, look, it's 1.5%. We have in the Czech Republic 2% used to be before the crisis. You know, before Greece lost 1/3 of its GDP. So I said, look, we have 70 districts in the country, 70 districts. So can you imagine that one district, and I named the names of possible candidates, one district in the Czech Republic fails. Is it possible to finance that failure? Very easily from the central government. We had to divide the country. Slovakia was not 1.5 or 2% of the European GDP. It was 1/3 of the Czechoslovak GDP. So the interconnections were 100 times bigger than between a very specific economy of Greece and the rest of Europe. So the split and letting Greece disappear from this straitjacket, which is killing Greece, would be the victory for everyone. Not for me, especially for the Greeks who are suffering due to that. And my final point, I am not making parallels between the current EU and the Soviet Union. This is a political attack when you say that. I am just talking about features and characteristics which have been emerging in Europe in the last years, which I consider close or similar to what I experienced in the communist Czechoslovakia in the past. This is not a comparison. We live in a totally different world, definitely.
While we're waiting for another question, I want to ask one. When I was in Prague about, I guess, 7 years ago or so, meeting with the central bank there, my sense was that they were very happy with their inflation targeting regime, and they really didn't look forward to joining the euro, to be honest, the central bank. And it seems to me that the recent experiences, in spite of the fact that I think still in principle there's an expectation or some announcement that they're going to eventually join the euro, that my guess is this has now been put off indefinitely and probably is unlikely to ever happen. But I'd like you to comment on that.
First, Czech Republic. I was president of the country when we signed the admission treaty. One of the points in the treaty is to promise to accept the euro. But because there was no timing there, so we were absolutely happy. I didn't consider it a problem. So. So the debate about whether and how to enter the Eurozone has been in my country a permanent issue, sometimes going down, up, but this has been an issue. I must say that I am even surprised that we are not yet there. 20 years ago, I remember at a conference here in Lago di Como, Černivio, Villa d'Este, some 20 years ago, I got the question, when do you plan, after joining the EU, when do you plan to accept the euro? And I was joking, 20 years ago. I was joking, saying, well, I think we have to find some interesting anniversary of something to do it to that date. And as a joke, 20 years ago, I said, what about to do it in the moment of the 100th anniversary of the great Bolshevik October Revolution in Russia, to do it in the year 2017. And I must admit that even I considered it a joke. Now it seems to me absolutely impossible to enter the euro in 2017. So it was permanently that issue. I remember before the Greek crisis, which was in May, the culmination was in May 2010, Angela Merkel was in Prague officially with a delegation in the Prague Castle, and 1 hour serious debate. And at the end of it, Angela asked me a question, almost off the record. But the ministers and the delegations were there, but almost off the record. Do you think that in the year 2015 you will already enter the Eurozone? Angela asked me at that moment. And I asked Angela, do you really think that in the year 2015 the euro will still exist? So this is a permanent debate in our country, permanent, and there is one shift, political or another, which starts talking about it more or not. So this is definitely not the issue of today, tomorrow, or day after tomorrow, but it may happen on condition the euro will still exist.
Well, we've come to the end of our time, so I hope you'll all join me in expressing our appreciation for an extremely stimulating.
And actually, if you wouldn't mind joining me at the podium, President Klaus, I have a small presentation for you.
I have several copies of it. I have.
Yes, yeah. Easier. So it's a little, make it where I can, there we go. As a thank you to President Klaus for honoring the society and speaking, the plaque reads, President Vaclav Klaus, in recognition of his contributions to economics, March 2015.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have several copies of my book in English, so if I may
nice.
give it to
thank you very much.
Oh, that's so kind of you.
Thank you very much.
So much. Can I get you to sign it too?
Global warming. There's another book we just published here by the Università Bocconi, Integrazione Europea senza fusione.
Yeah, you can read it down.
You want to give me a second book? I will be pleased. Here we will learn what kind of liberal I
All right, thank you very much. We're adjourned.